Today, there was a mountain of work at the office. By the time I came home carrying some files, my head was pounding. I asked Tanya to make me a cup of milk tea. She replied that the milk was nearly gone, and what remained was saved for the morning tea. Her answer caught me off guard. "What do you mean there's no milk left? Where did it go?" I asked. Tanya explained, "Shahir's exams are going on, so I give him milk every night. Plus, Amma takes her medication daily, and the doctor recommended she have milk regularly. She also likes to have tea now and then during the day. That's why I saved the remaining milk for tomorrow morning." Hearing Shahir's name again made my head throb even more. He was my nephew, only 12 years old, but it felt like he was becoming my rival. Tanya seemed more concerned about his needs than mine. She spent more time and energy on him than she did on me. In our home, meals were cooked based on what Shahir liked. If I made a special request in the morning, by evening, it would be Shahir's favorite dish on the table instead. When I confronted her about it, she would stammer and explain that Shahir didn't eat certain things, so she had to cater to his preferences. A few times, I left the dinner table in protest, refusing to eat. After that, she began preparing two separate dishes, one for me and one for Shahir. It had been 6 months since Shahir moved into our home, and I couldn't help but notice how my wife had grown distant from me. The realization sparked a deep resentment within me. Tonight, in frustration, I switched off the lights and turned my back to her, grumbling loudly. "She's made life unbearable. My head hurts. I thought tea would help ease the pain and help me relax enough to get my work done. But clearly no one here cares about my comfort." I muttered bitterly into the dark, my voice rising. But Tanya remained undisturbed, peacefully asleep. I couldn't understand why she had changed so much. She used to be the one who cared about my smallest needs. Even when I was cold toward her, she would hover around me, making sure I was comfortable. Despite the unfair way I had treated her, her love and care had never faltered. For the first time, I admitted to myself that I had been cruel to her. This realization struck me like a bolt, but I quickly dismissed it. What could I do about it now? There was a solution, of course. The doctor had told me it was all treatable, but my pride wouldn't let me accept that. I had snapped at the doctor, just as I often snapped at Tanya. Now, seeing the sadness in her eyes and the weariness on her face, I felt pangs of guilt. Yet I was a man, and the thought of any solution that might tarnish my masculinity was intolerable. I didn't want to lower myself in front of her. Caught up in my own tangled thoughts, I finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I was again irritated by her doting behavior towards Shahir. Couldn't she see that he was no longer just a little boy? He was growing into a young man who understood everything. But Tanya seemed oblivious as she leaned over him, her dupatta casually draped over one shoulder, helping him eat breakfast. Shahir, in turn, just sat there staring at her. It was too much. "Cover yourself properly with your dupatta," I barked. She looked embarrassed and adjusted it quickly. I glared at her before leaving for work. My mood was sour, and I carried that frustration with me into another busy day at the office. He was just a 12-year-old child, perpetually quiet and withdrawn. Shahir had witnessed his parents' death with his own eyes, and it seemed to have broken something inside him. It was as if he no longer believed in love or its permanence. He grew detached, lost in a cloud of disbelief. My wife was the only one who could handle him, who managed to bring even the faintest sense of normalcy back into his life. Gradually, Shahir began to rely on her entirely. Over time, his memories of his parents started to fade. He no longer mentioned them and slowly came to see us as his entire world, especially her. He followed her around the house, clinging to her as if she were his lifeline. At first, I didn't think much of it, but something inside me shifted the day my friend's demeanor changed. That's when a darker train of thought began to take root in my mind. My friend had always been cheerful, the kind of person whose laughter was contagious. We used to joke that he was the only person in the world who never seemed to have a worry or care. Whenever we said that, he would laugh along with us in his usual carefree way. But recently, something had changed. His laughter had disappeared, replaced by a quiet, brooding demeanor. It was as if he had forgotten how to smile. I finally confronted him, pulling him aside one day. "What's going on?" I asked. "You've been so preoccupied lately. Why do you seem so tense all the time?" At first, he said nothing, just stared at the ground. Then, to my astonishment, tears began streaming down his face. "I'm so ashamed to even say this out loud," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm at my wit's end. I don't know who to turn to." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never seen my friend like this. So broken, so vulnerable. When I pressed him further, he finally blurted out the truth. "I caught my wife with the servant's son. He's just a boy, only 15. I still can't believe what I saw. I thought my eyes were deceiving me, but there they were, and I couldn't deny it." I was stunned. The image of his wife, who I had always thought of as kind and well-mannered, flashed in my mind. She had been a gracious host whenever we visited, always treating us warmly. My friend had always spoken so highly of her. And now he was telling me this? It felt unreal. "What happened then?" I asked, my voice low. "What did you do?" He wiped his eyes and continued. "At first I didn't know how to react. She started crying, begging me for forgiveness, swearing it was her first and only mistake. She kept saying it would never happen again, that it was a moment of weakness. I was furious, but more than that, I was hurt. I couldn't even look at her. I spent days and days avoiding her, barely functioning. I thought about kicking her out, but we have kids. How could I break up the family? So I stayed. I gave her one more chance, but I also made sure to change everything in the house. I fired the servant and hired older staff. I thought I'd fix the problem." He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "But it was only a matter of time. A few days ago, I saw her again, this time with the neighbor's son. He's just 15 too, and this time she didn't even bother to deny it. When I confronted her, she told me she gets more pleasure from being with younger boys than with me. Can you believe that? She admitted it so casually, as if it were a simple preference." His voice broke as he finished the story, his head in his hands. I could see the despair etched across his face, the weight of betrayal dragging him down. He was struggling to hold himself together, and I didn't know what to say. I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You need to talk to her again. If she truly understands how much she's hurt you, and she's willing to change, maybe it's worth giving her one last chance. If not, you have every right to make whatever decision you need to for your own peace. You can't spend your entire life torturing yourself like this." As I said those words, my thoughts drifted back to my own wife and Shahir. The images of her face and his face seemed to blur together in my mind. My stomach tightened with an uncomfortable knot of anger and anxiety. It wasn't that I believed she would ever betray me. I trusted her, at least I thought I did. But after hearing my friend's story, I couldn't help but think about how much time she spent with Shahir, how close she had become to him. Every interaction that I'd previously dismissed as harmless suddenly felt suspicious in the back of my mind. I shook my head, trying to dispel those thoughts. My wife wasn't like that. She wasn't capable of such betrayal. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't completely ignore it. But now I was deeply troubled. What if my wife turned out to be the same? What if she developed improper feelings for Shahir? The thought alone sent shivers down my spine. I loved my wife dearly, and even imagining her betrayal left me shaken. I had no idea what was happening right under my nose, in my own house. Suddenly, I found myself disconnected from everything. I began to put myself in my friend's position. Even my dreams were haunted by disturbing images, where I'd see my wife with Shahir. Night after night, I woke up, my heart racing, unable to find peace. One day, I suggested to my mother that we should send Shahir to a cadet college. "It'll help him secure a bright future," I reasoned. But my mother began to cry and my wife's eyes filled with tears as well. No one wanted to part with Shahir. My mother said, "He's my daughter's last memory. I live just by looking at him. May Allah grant you children soon. If Shahir leaves, this house will become lifeless." Faced with their emotions, I reluctantly dropped the idea, but I became more watchful. I started observing my wife and Shahir more closely, trying to understand what was really happening. These days, kids matured faster, exposed to the world through mobile phones and the internet, and some women, unable to act on their desires openly, sought secrecy. They used the situation to keep their affairs hidden, making sure no one could speak out against them. These thoughts plagued my mind as I returned home one evening, every little detail catching my critical eye. Inside the house, I saw my wife sitting close to Shahir. She had her arm draped over his shoulder, whispering something I couldn't make out. Their closeness was unsettling. As I quietly moved closer, I overheard her say, "Keep the door open when I come to your room tonight. Don't fall asleep and ruin the plan." Her words stunned me. I stood frozen, my jaw dropping in disbelief. What plan was she talking about? I struggled to control my expression, quickly pretending I hadn't heard anything. My wife's face was lit up with a strange smile, her eyes glinting with an unusual spark. She kept glancing at Shahir, laughing and exchanging looks with him. I felt a sharp pain shoot through my head. I retreated to my room, my mind racing. A short while later, my wife entered, acting as though everything was normal. Anger boiled over, and I snapped at her, telling her to leave the room. "I'm not feeling well," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "Just go." She looked surprised, maybe even hurt, but she didn't argue. Without a word, she left the room. I knew I was harsh at times, especially when my temper flared, but she always handled it with grace. When I was in a better mood, she gently reminded me of my behavior, pointing out how I could be unfair. I admired her patience, the way she never added fuel to the fire during an argument. But this time was different. I couldn't shake the image of her signaling to Shahir. It replayed in my mind again and again, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that something was wrong between them. I felt as though I was losing my grip on reality. Unable to stay still, I left the bedroom and wandered back into the house. My eyes darted to the kitchen as I heard the faint sound of whispering. I paused, listening carefully. There were also faint tapping sounds, perhaps dishes or cups. I moved closer to the kitchen and peeked in. My wife was there with Shahir, standing so close to him that their shoulders nearly touched. They were speaking in low voices, their heads bent together as if sharing a secret. Seeing me, they both fell silent. Shahir got up quickly and went back to his room. He was my sister's son, and until today I had never felt any anger toward him. But now, something inside me was simmering. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. My eyes stayed on my wife, watching and waiting for her next move. If she left our room to go to Shahir, I would catch her red-handed. I'd confront her, humiliate her, demand an explanation. "Is this what you call love and loyalty? Is this how you repay me?" I was furious, thinking about how women could be so untrustworthy. I couldn't stop my thoughts from spiraling. My mind conjured up images of betrayal. Just like my friend's wife had deceived him, I was convinced my wife was doing the same to me. As midnight approached, I watched as my wife slowly rose from bed and quietly stepped out of the room. My blood boiled. I could feel the anger rushing to my head, clouding my thoughts. But this wasn't the time to act on impulse. I needed to handle the situation calmly. If I confronted her and she denied everything, what proof would I have? I needed a witness. My mother was the only one I could trust to see the truth with her own eyes. I made my way to my mother's room, each step weighed down by anxiety. When I arrived, I saw that the light in Shahir's room was on and the door was shut. My heart sank further. I felt a wave of regret wash over me, sorrowful that my wife would do such a thing. I went into my mother's room and sat by her bedside. She stirred, surprised to see me. "What's wrong?" she asked, concerned. "Are you feeling okay?" For a moment, I couldn't find the words. I simply told her, "Don't ask me anything right now. Just come with me." My mother looked puzzled, but she nodded. It felt awful to disturb her like this, to pull her out of her sleep and into a situation that could break her heart. I knew that whatever I was about to show her might be too much for her to handle, but I needed her to see it herself. I needed her to understand why I was so tormented. We walked quietly towards Shahir's room. My steps were hesitant, my heart racing. When I reached the door, I placed my hand on the handle, trembling at the thought of what I might see. I tried to prepare myself, to steel my nerves for whatever lay behind that door. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. What I saw left me stunned. It was nothing like what I had imagined. My wife turned to me, wide-eyed and surprised. "What are you doing here? I thought you were asleep," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Shahir and my wife both looked pale, caught off guard, but not in the way I had feared. They exchanged a nervous glance before my wife spoke again. "We were going to wake you up to surprise you," she said, her voice trembling. "It's your birthday, and we wanted to make it special." She gestured toward the room, and I noticed a table set up with gift boxes and a cake. My wife had been lighting candles when I'd burst in. I stood frozen, staring at the gifts and the cake. She kept explaining, her voice earnest and almost pleading. "We thought we'd celebrate after you fell asleep so that we could surprise you. But you've ruined it now." Shame washed over me. I had been so quick to assume the worst, so certain of her betrayal. The warmth and sincerity in her voice broke through my anger. Slowly, I turned and walked back to our bedroom. I sat there in silence, reflecting on my own thoughts and actions. A short while later, they came in with the cake. My wife and Shahir stood there, smiling as they sang, "Happy Birthday." I cut the cake, but my heart felt heavy. Even as I smiled, I couldn't shake the guilt and sadness within me. How could I have doubted her so completely? How could I have let my own insecurities cloud my judgment? Later that night, after everyone else had left the room, I took her hands in mine. "Whatever you ask of me tonight, I'll give it to you," I said softly. She looked at me surprised. "Are you serious?" she asked. I nodded, my smile gentle. "Yes, I promise." She hesitated, then finally said, "Then please get your treatment. I love children so much, and I want to be a mother. That's why I care so deeply for Shahir. He helps me fill the void in my heart. When I look after him, it feels like I'm caring for my own child. And I've heard that showing kindness to orphans pleases Allah. I want Shahir to never feel the absence of his mother. If he's happy, Allah will be pleased with us, and maybe we'll be blessed with a child of our own." Her words were so simple, so genuine. There was no deception in her voice, no pretense. I sat there listening to her honesty, feeling ashamed of the doubts I had harbored. If only she had known the suspicions I had nurtured, the dark thoughts that had driven me to this point. I had been ready to accuse her, to humiliate her, and instead she had been planning to celebrate my birthday, to show me love and joy. I realized then how deeply she cared for me, how much she wanted to build a future together. My heart ached at my own foolishness, but I also felt a glimmer of hope that I could make amends and be the husband she truly deserved. Later, my mother asked me why I seemed so troubled that night, especially when it should have been a happy occasion. I told her that maybe it just seemed that way because she was woken up. "It's nothing really," I said. "I probably just looked off because my sleep was interrupted and I had a headache." But deep down, my conscience pricked at me. I was angry at myself for letting my pride deprive my wife of such a special moment, a celebration she had planned with so much thought and care. That's when I made a promise to her. I told her, "Whatever you want, we'll do it. Let's see the doctor tomorrow and I'll commit to proper treatment." The next day, I finally agreed to follow through. It took just 6 months of treatment for me to be completely healthy again. And then Allah blessed us with the greatest gift, our own child. We couldn't stop thanking him for this incredible joy. I was also grateful for something else. My wife never found out about the doubts I had harbored. If she had even a hint of what I had wrongly suspected, I could only imagine what she would think of me. It's not always the case that what we see with our eyes or hear with our ears is the absolute truth. Sometimes appearances can be deceiving, and assumptions can be completely wrong. Not everything that happens to others around us will happen to us. Not all people are the same, and neither are their circumstances. Looking back, I realized how much I owed to my wife's kindness, patience, and love. I had allowed my insecurities to cloud my perception of her, but she never wavered in her loyalty or her care for me. Through this experience, I learned to trust her fully and to appreciate the goodness in her that had always been there. I thank God for guiding me through this test and for showing me that I was wrong to doubt her. I was grateful beyond words that he had helped me overcome my suspicions and blessed us with the gift of a child, a testament to his mercy and grace.